Everyone who registered for the webcast is going to get a link afterwards to the actual recording and to Chris's presentation deck. Once we make sure that we have scrubbed any um, sensitive information from it. Um, we have muted the entire audience, but we encourage and we would love to hear your questions. If you guys are able to put them in the chat window or send us an email. Uh-oh.
I've actually turned off the chat window and moved it into the official Q&A, which is a new feature of Link 2013 that allows an actual moderated Q&A. So you'll notice on the bottom of your presentation a tab that says Q&A, and you can go ahead and post your questions in there.
Excellent. So I think with that, I'll just turn it over to Chris. And if you guys have any technical difficulties, please post those in the Q&A as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time this afternoon to join us. I'll ask you to forgive me. I am down with the flu, but I am working today. So if I have to go on mute very briefly for a coughing fit, I will do so. But hopefully it shouldn't be too disruptive to our webinar today. So today we're going to cover Office 365 migration, sort of the tips and tricks and best practices.
You will now be placed into conference. To mute your line, press *6. To unmute, press #6.
Someone just dialed in. Excellent. Today we're going to cover those tips and tricks and best practices of things to look for when you're going to migrate to Office 365. We're going to focus a lot on the Exchange piece. We're going to talk about the other ones, both SharePoint and Link, because there are some nuanced differences there. But a lot of people, when we're talking about migrations, we're talking about mail. But we will cover all the applications. So I'll start off just with a quick couple of poll questions. So the first one, for those of you who are planning to go to Office 365, which application are you planning on doing first? So give a minute for people to answer. All right, see some Exchange, see some Link. All right, and this is not surprising. The majority of people plan to start with Exchange, and that is where we tend to start, and we'll see some of those differences. All right, and second one, when are you planning the migration? When are you planning to do this? Have you already started? Are you 3 or 6 months out, more than a year out, or haven't fully committed to it as a platform yet, and are still looking for some convincing? Okay. All right. So some good answers. So everyone on the call is at least 6 months out, which is good in some ways because it gives you time to do a lot of the tips and tricks I'm going to show you today, and I'll go through a lot of those processes that I'm going to outline. All right, so if we think about Office 365, what is it? And I just like to level set because for a lot of people, there's a lot of confusion as to what Office 365 actually is. And I usually start with the bold statement that's an attention grabber of Office 365 does not exist. There is no such thing. There's no product called Office 365. There's an offering, but no product. It's actually Link, Exchange, SharePoint, Yammer, Office, and all of those pieces hosted in the Microsoft Data Center. But at the end of the day, it's still Exchange. It's still Link, and it's still SharePoint. It's actually the same bits that you would run on premises if you were to put it in your own data center. So what Office 365 is those applications hosted in the Microsoft Data Center with some SLAs, 24/7 support, built-in geo-redundancy. So when we think about that component, we want to think about what would we do for a normal Exchange migration, right? If we were going to do an on-premise Exchange migration, none of those functions or features that we would do if we were going to do it on-premise go away. We're going to still have all of those same requirements. If we're doing a link migration or enablement, a lot of the same things we would think about on-premise, we're going to think about when we go to the cloud. Quick slide, again, for those of you who are not fully sold, understand this is the direction Microsoft's going. When we think about the software service model and the benefit that customers are getting out of this, your organization is not in the business of email, right? Unless you're an email hosting provider. You're not in the business of doing email. You're in the business of doing whatever your company does to make money or help people. So we want to take and we want to flip that number that exists in the marketplace. Gartner and Forrester say 70% of IT budget is spent keeping the lights on, and 30% is spent driving the business forward. We want to flip those numbers, and we want it to be 30% of the budget is spent keeping the lights on and 70% actually utilizing the applications. When we think about Exchange 2013 or Lync 2013 or all the new versions of the applications, as an organization, we're likely using less than 20% of what the application's capable of. So we really want to start utilizing the applications to their fullest. So very tried and tested solution, great logos there. So what is Office 365? Last slide, setting the table, and then we'll get into tips and tricks. It is SharePoint, Lync, and Exchange. It's 50 gigs of mail per user with an unlimited archive. It is IM, presence, and conferencing. The one thing Lync in the cloud is not today is enterprise voice, which means hosted PBX. It can be everything up to that within the Lync solution set. When you think about licensing for Office 365 and the different enterprise SKUs, this is what the E4 SKU is for. The E4 SKU is everything in Office 365 plus the Lync VoiceCal for running the PBX on premises. SharePoint Online for all of our SharePoint needs, and Office Pro Plus. And again, Office Pro Plus, biggest misconceptions that we're dealing with is, somehow this is just running Office in the cloud. That is not the case. It's still running it on-premise, still running it on the device as you do today. It just does give you access to a lot more features and functions. It's all a per-user based model, so we're going to license it out by user. So now we understand kind of what it is, and if you need a deeper dive into the particulars of Office 365 and what the different licenses are and the different speeds and feeds, definitely reach out to us afterwards. We'll be happy to hop on a call and kind of walk through it. But the goal of today is to really, what are those things you need to do before you migrate? What are those thought processes or items that you need to figure out as you're going along? So first is cleaning house. Active Directory is the backbone of everything we do. If your Active Directory is messy or has a lot of orphaned objects in it or duplicates, we're going to find a very difficult time in making everything work the way we want it to. So things we recommend are a health check, performing whether it's internal or external, performing an Active Directory health check. That includes running the best practices analyzer for Active Directory. There are great tools like IDFix that exist out there. So one of the nuanced things for Office 365, there are certain objects that Office 365 doesn't like. One example is a pound sign in front of a distribution list name. So if you put a hashtag or a pound sign in front of your DLs to move them up to the top of the list on your global address book, then those aren't going to migrate into Office 365 successfully. So the IDFix tool will go through your Active Directory and tell you those objects that are either duplicates or have incorrect names or incorrect characters that need to be remediated before they can be synced. And then we might also want to look, just as a side there, at the Exchange Best Practices Analyzer as well to make sure your Exchange environment is well. Let's clean up all of those items that we don't need. Disable, delete, or archive those users or mailboxes that we don't need. We don't want to migrate them up. We don't want to migrate useless data. In some cases we're talking about migrating, 1, 2, 3, 5 terabytes of mail, if not more. We really want to make sure we narrow that down so we're only migrating what's really important. And ultimately, at the end of it, make a list. What are you moving? Where's the target? And identify what's moving. And even taking that a step further, what groups are moving together. We'll see the different migration types in another slide a few ahead here. But once we have a list of what's moving, depending on the migration type we're doing, it may radically affect how and when I'm going to migrate people. From a mail standpoint, now there was someone who said that they're going to be doing Lync first. Unless you're running Lync on premise today, you're not really migrating anything, but all of that AD health check piece is essential, because that identity management piece, or that AD piece, is a fundamental piece across all the applications. So even if you're going to enable Lync or SharePoint first, and we're not actually going to deal with migrating mailboxes, it's still something we're going to need to check. Learning. I can't stress it enough. People today, we don't have the time or resources at most organizations to send people to the training we did 10 or 15 years ago. This is part of what's made IT a lot more difficult in the modern day, because not only is my user population have to be trained, but my IT staff has to be trained, and we're not spending the time or energy to train them correctly. So read up on Office 365. There are great blogs from Microsoft. You can go to the tech sites. You can go to TechNet. Take the time and read. Take that a step further. Become active in the community. I happen to be out of our Boston office up here in New England, and there's a Boston Office 365 user group that meets monthly. I'm certain in your particular area there's likely an Office 365 user group, or if there isn't one, maybe you should start one. And we'd love to help you kind of get that on track if that's something you're interested in doing. Attend trainings, whether it's the Blue Book certification, the actual certification course, or just basic administration courses, or 2-day how-to guides. Making sure you know those nuanced differences of administration, I think, are key to a successful deployment. And then make sure you map out your security and compliance, and that you're comfortable with the security and compliance features of Office 365. If you haven't already, visit the Office 365 Trust Center. It's a great web page where they'll lay out all of the certifications that Office 365 has, from the JTIL, FIPA, FISMA, SOX, HIPAA, all the wonderful different certifications that Office 365 has. Now, you won't actually be, if you are, say, SOX compliant, Sarbanes-Oxley compliant organization, you're not going to be able to get the SAS 70 Type 2 until you're an actual client. They will tell you that they have it, but they don't actually hand out the SAS 70 until it's requested by an existing subscriber. That's just for security reasons, just only giving it to those who actually need it. Map out your requirements. What are your mailbox needs? So actually, I have to update this slide. Sorry, I left it old. Mailbox is limited to 25 gigs. Nope, it's 50 gigs of storage. So I typed that in wrong. So it's 50 gigs of storage. Is that enough? Do you have mailboxes that exceed that? The number of unique recipients allowed to be sent to per day. One good thing that has changed, and I did update this slide here, is the individual message size just recently increased. So it used to be 25 megs was the maximum message size. So if you didn't have a preset message size that was smaller than 25 megs, there was potentially a lot of items we had to go in and root out of your mailbox. So this was something we used to spend a lot of time doing, identifying those messages that were too large and archiving them. Now with that increase in size, it's a little less of a concern, but still something we need to think about. And the last piece here, public folders. Are you using them today? is this your chance to get off of them and move them to SharePoint. Microsoft's been trying to kill public folders for many years now. And briefly in the previous release of Office 365, they had killed them, but there was enough complaining that they brought them back. But it is something Microsoft has been trying to kill for quite some time. So this is the official notice from my end. I do with all my clients of you've been put on notice. Microsoft has put you on notice that they want to kill them. So don't be surprised if in the next version or the version after that they are officially gone. Because Microsoft has been trying to move away from them. So this migration may be that perfect opportunity to migrate those features over to a SharePoint site. So this is a big piece, the identity management. Now this is sort of the crux of any project, regardless of what application we're going to do first, whether it's Exchange, Lync, or SharePoint. We have to set up our sign-on and connect our Office 365 tenant back to our environment. And there's really three options we see customers do. First is a simple DirSync passync, where we're simply going to synchronize the password up to the cloud, and all authentication will take place in the cloud. While this is the cheapest of all the solutions, it's also the most cumbersome to an IT organization, because now you're managing the user objects in two different places. You're keeping them in sync, but if you disable a user in your Active Directory, you still have to go up to the cloud and disable them there. They haven't been disabled automatically in both places. So while it is the least expensive option, it is also the most cumbersome. Next is ADFS, or Active Directory Federated Services. Now, this is utilizing your AD to authenticate users. So when someone goes to Office 365, that challenge request is passed to a proxy that sits out in your DMZ, which then comes internal to an internal box, which passes it off to a domain controller, and then back out again saying you're authenticated. Now this was kind of the no-brainer way we did it for most companies once they hit a certain size, because it created a little more seamlessness for the IT organization. One of the flaws with this, though, is that if we do it on premise, if we were to do it in your infrastructure, well, now, A, I'm spinning up servers, and for a lot of you, if I were to ask why you're considering Office 365, one of the reasons is server consolidation and getting rid of some stuff. So now I'm going to tell you to put servers back on premise. The other flaw is now if you have a single site and don't have site redundancy with your data centers, I'm now created a single point of failure for this wonderful cloud service. Again, we've got this great Office 365 cloud that I've now created a single point of failure at your data center. So a lot of people took this, and what they did is they would put this up in Azure. So and when they would put this up in Azure, they would make their lives much easier, because now they got this resiliency, redundancy, and everything utilizing the Azure service. This led to the creation of AD Premium. AD Premium kind of takes us to another level where we're going to use a SaaS-based offering from Microsoft that allows authentication into Office 365 as well as 2,500 other SaaS-based applications. They just recently added the feature where we'll be able to do single sign-on to on-premise-based applications, as well as self-service password reset and multi-factor authentication through something called Phone Factor. So this is a great way to do multi-factor authentication if you have that requirement. So regardless of which application you're starting with, one of these three has to happen. We have to connect your tenancy. We have to set up login. This is the heavy lifting of the first project. So once we're done, if you were starting with Exchange, once we're done with this is when we would now start doing migrations and looking at that. In the case of Lync, once you're done with this, now you just got to push out the Lync client and open up a couple of ports on the firewall. With SharePoint, once this is done, SharePoint is now quote-unquote up and running. What that means is the tenancy is available. no development's been done. It's just a blank SharePoint site, which is pretty much useless. But now you're free to start doing the development and start building your site the way you want it. So this is the key component, because whichever one you do first is going to include this from a labor standpoint. So the first project you do within Office 365 is always the most expensive or time consuming, because you've got to do the identity management piece. So once we've got the identity management set up, we have to think about the migration type. Here's a big hint. If you're on Exchange 2010 Service Pack 3, your life is going to be a lot easier, because that enables what we call a hybrid deployment. A hybrid server allows you to connect your Exchange environment on-premise up to the cloud. This allows you to do single mailboxes at a time. This also means the mailbox doesn't shut off while we're migrating it. It stays live the whole time, so the users get minimal disruption. It also means when I migrate a user, I don't break things like delegation and shared calendars, because both the on-premise and the cloud Exchange environment function as one. However, you have to be 2010 Service Pack 3 for this. So if you're still running Exchange 2007 or Exchange 2003 today, then you're going to end up having to do what we call a cutover migration. A cutover migration is just that. We're going to utilize a tool, MigWiz, Nuix, there's a bunch out there. Those are the big two that we use internally at New Signature, but there are others. And we're going to utilize that tool to cut over the mailboxes. Now, because of these older versions, the user is down while we're doing that migration. And if we don't migrate everybody at the same time, we are going to have a broken environment for a period of time, meaning people in the cloud won't be able to see people on premise and vice versa. So we really need to migrate everybody over at the same time whenever possible. So, but these are the big things to think about when we're talking about that staged migration or that seamless migration. We really want to get to 2010 Service Pack 3. That's going to make our lives the easiest. Some other things to think about here are how you're going to roll out Office. Are you going to roll out the new version of Office at the same time? How are you going to roll out the Lync client if you're going to choose to roll that out? What are we going to do from a mobile device standpoint or MDM standpoint? We need to update mail profiles potentially on iPads and iPhones and Android devices, and are we going to send out instructions to the users, or are we going to try and push out a new mail profile using things like Intune and System Center to push out mail profiles? There's all sorts of options here for how to do it, but these are the big things to think about. Now, we cover all of this in something called a Solutions Alignment Workshop. So that Solution Alignment Workshop is designed, it's a roughly 300 questionnaire or sort of statement that we walk through with you as a client, just to make sure that you're aligned to Office 365, right? In a short, half an hour, 40-minute webinar today, it's hard to go through that document that normally takes us 4 or 5 hours to go through with you. But these are the types of things, the mail message size. Do you understand that, Office 365 is geo-redundant in 2 data centers with 3 copies of data at each one? Do you understand that you cannot do a SIP connection from Lync back to anything on-premise? Do you understand the mail message caps or some of the different limitations or benefits of Office 365, just to make sure there's no gotchas? And so that's something we can definitely do with you to walk through. Again, that takes a good amount of time to go through, so it's definitely something that you want to spend some time on. So again, we have that architectural design session, or ADS, where we'll do a solution alignment workshop. We can do a full-on planning engagement where we'll work with you over multiple days. And if you think about it, what we're going to do during a planning, the typical things that you need to think about during a planning engagement is A, mapping out your identity management, as we outlined earlier. then doing all of those checks on your Active Directory, right, going back through and checking your AD, making sure it's running correctly, making sure the best practices analyzers, running tools like IDFix to get a better handle on your Active Directory. We're then going to go through that solution alignment workshop to make sure you're fully aligned with Office 365, and then give you a migration plan. A typical migration for Office 365 for average 500-person customer, right? It's a 6 to 8 week project, beginning to end, through pilot phase, migrating over 25 users, using a hybrid server, and making sure those are working, and then turning over the keys for you to migrate people over. I get asked a lot, how long should this migration take? And the answer really is as long as you want it to, especially in a hybrid migration. With a hybrid migration, you really have control over how aggressive you want to be with that time frame. Whereas with a cutover migration, you have to be aggressive, right? You need the more you drag it out, the more pain your users are going to feel. So those planning engagements are useful. There are also architectural design sessions, or ADSs, which are single-day events put on by Microsoft at their corporate offices. So we do these a lot in conjunction with your Microsoft team, where we can go into one of the technology centers and spend a day there kind of going through the best practices and kind of going through some of this stuff. Next is something more for the business users, which is a customer immersion experience, or a MEC. You'll also often Microsoft Experience Center. It's got a couple different names depending on who you're talking to. But this is a hands-on experience that we do with the users to kind of get them ready for the new applications and the new features, right? And again, it's not so much to do with the cloud, because the fact that it's in the cloud is a minimal impact to them, other than it's highly available. And we all know in IT that highly available to users doesn't mean anything unless something's gone down recently, right? Nobody remembers the 10,000 hours of uptime you had. They remember the 2 hours of downtime you had. So it's but a customer immersion experience is a way to get those users a hands-on experience with the 2013 applications and kind of what's going on, and a day in the life to help them set priorities as to what's useful and what features or functions would be great to tackle first. Last, and I know I kind of did these out of order, is training classes, right? So we do offer both the Blue Book certification courses as well as shorter sort of administrative level classes of here are the things you need to know from a PowerShell perspective or from a management perspective as to what to do. If you think about those tips and tricks too, reading up on PowerShell and taking PowerShell classes and getting more familiar with PowerShell if you're not already is definitely a good idea, because there's a lot you can do with PowerShell from a reporting standpoint and a management standpoint of all of the modern applications. There's a fifth one I didn't include here, but it is one that I would think is something to keep an eye on, and that is sort of vNext. So some of you may not be familiar, but Microsoft has combined Lync Conference, SharePoint Conference, and TechEd to a single conference called Ignite. And it's the first week of May in Chicago this year, where they are timing the release of a whole bunch of applications, or at least the information of them, right around that time frame. So there is a new version of Lync that's coming out that's already been announced. They're actually changing the name of Lync to Skype for Business. We're expecting a new version of Exchange, a new version of SharePoint, a new version of Office, both for the PC and the Mac, as well as Windows 10. So some really great new stuff that's coming out over the next few months. I'm actually pretty excited. I got to attend the Windows 10 launch event yesterday, and if you haven't, I highly recommend doing it, because there's a lot of tie-in to Office 365 from that operating system, right? Microsoft has really built the operating system around Office 365 and connecting it to it. Things like integrating Outlook, full-blown Outlook into the OS now, so that it's there. Microsoft is also in progress of creating a brand new web browser, so you may also not have heard that Internet Explorer has been deprecated, right? No new versions of IE. The current version is the last that they're ever going to release. And they're building a brand new web browser moving forward. So there's a lot of changes coming in the entire Microsoft ecosystem, and being up to date on these things. Now, again, all of you have said on this call that you're at least 6 months out to your Office 365 migration. So definitely something that things you want to keep an eye on coming up over the next few months. Okay, again, to recap, we want to clean up our AD. We want to check our best practices analyzer. We want to retire any mailboxes or any garbage that we don't intend to migrate. We want to think through what else we're doing at the same time. Are we doing an Office rollout? And then we want to figure out, can we do a hybrid migration or do we have to do a cutover migration? And once we figured out if we're doing a cutover migration, what are the different options, what are the different tools, and how do I want to do it? And then there's all these wonderful things that are either free or you can use deployment planning services days, ways to engage us for training moving forward. All right, with that, I want to open it up to Q&A. So I'm going to check the Q&A pane. If you do have questions, please go ahead and post them in the Q&A window, and I'll be happy to answer them. All right, so not seeing any questions come in. Hopefully you got something good out of today. There's a lot coming. There's a lot coming up over the next few months. There's a lot we're expecting to change over the next few months. Once the new versions of the applications are out there, we really want to get a good handle on that. Actually, another tip and trick, as we think about it, Microsoft rolls out features and functions to Office 365 faster than they can on premise. While you still have the ability to stage those and not roll them out the day they're available, things will be available to you, new features like clutter or the groups within Exchange and being able to create groups using OneDrive and Exchange. So there's all these great new features. Making sure you have a good documented testing policy if you are SOX compliant or if you've got other compliances. Making sure you have that process nailed down, I think, is a big key so that you can take advantage of these features quick as they come out.
Chris, I'd be interested to hear, what was the worst Office 365 migration that you've worked on so far?
So, won't use customer names, but we had a migration.
Protect the innocent.
Yep, where they were doing a cutover migration, and for some reason they decided they wanted to stage it over 4 different weekends. They were going to move a quarter of the company each time. Perfectly acceptable, fine. But remember, when we're doing a cutover migration, people in that scenario are cut off from the people who are on premise. And the problem is we weren't doing direct end user communication, and the IT staff did not communicate to users efficiently as to what was going on. User communication and over communication, really keeping people up to date as to what's going on and what to expect, goes a long way to mitigating any problems you have or expected hiccups you have through the process. So really over communicating to the user population as to, this is what's going to happen while we're in flight. This is how long it's going to happen. This is why we also like hybrid migrations, because in a hybrid migration, I don't have this problem. It's much easier to do. It's why we much prefer hybrid migrations. We understand there are still a lot of people on older versions of Exchange, and the reason for that is, cost-benefit analysis, right? I call it the BS to pay ratio. When we think about doing an Exchange migration in years past, to go to the new version was going to cost me X amount of man hours and X amount of training and X amount of testing, and I was going to have to either internally or externally invest X amount of dollars into that. Remember, we started out by saying most people use 20% of what the application's capable of. So if all you're doing is sending, receiving mail and filtering out spam and bad messages, then going from Exchange 03 to Exchange 2013, what's the benefit to you? You're only using the most basic of features of the application. Therefore, there's not a huge amount of benefit. So people often struggled with that. So one of the values of Office 365, if I can reduce that cost, if I can reduce that energy to migrate, all of a sudden the pay has to be much less. And hopefully we can get you using more of the application. But that was poor user communication. Just about every migration, if you ask me, for every migration horror story, it all goes back to poor end user communication and poor end user involvement in the process.
I think there's a lesson to be learned there.
Absolutely. On the flip side, the best ones are always those ones that are we're involving the business units. We do a MEC or some type of hands-on environment with key business users. We're getting them involved, right? Because we're going to start with things like Exchange and maybe Link, but eventually we're going to look at things like SharePoint or Project Server or CRM or the other benefits of the Microsoft Cloud. And we really want to involve our business users and feel like they have a voice in the process. And the more we can involve them, and the more we can, the user population is a lot more sophisticated today than they ever were in the past. I often joke and tell the story of my now 13-year-old son, who's 12 at the time, walked into my office and said, "Hey, Dad, I need a static IP address. I looked up on Verizon. This is what it's going to cost us a month. Can you take it out of my allowance? Oh, by the way, here's the ports I need you open on the firewall for the house." And I'm staring at him. Now, granted, he is my son, but I haven't taught him any of this stuff yet. And he knew all of that information. And he knew it because he had gone online and done some research because he wanted to spin up a Minecraft server at the house. Think about him when he enters the workforce. Goodness help us if he's not in IT when he's done with college. But think about the sophistication of the end user. Let's involve them. Let's get them involved in the decision making and telling us what's going to be the most beneficial, what features of the application are going to be the most helpful, so we can start utilizing those and really getting the most advantage. And this is actually true whether or not you're going to Office 365 or you're going to deploy Exchange 2013 on premise. At the end of the day, Exchange 2013 offers a lot of great features. Well, which of those features are going to be the most beneficial to your organization? If nobody knows what they are, if nobody understands what those benefits are, what the capabilities are, Exchange 2013 has a full PCI compliance engine built into it. The DLP or the data loss prevention or the search capabilities across multiple information stores of 2013 is incredible. Which is the most useful? How are we going to utilize these things? These are the things that we see with the most successful migrations we do.
Okay, I'm still not seeing any questions in the Q&A pane, so I think people are just being shy. I am going to stop the recording now.